Wren is a cute little app that promises that you can offset your personal impact, which feels and sounds great. You enter your information, like information about your lifestyle, into their little calculator, and it comes out and tells you what your estimated carbon emissions are every year. And then they show you a little subscription, and you can actually pay money for them to offset your personal carbon emissions. Sounds great. Sounds like, cool, I can do something about it. And I can personally feel good knowing that, like, my impact is offset. Just one problem. Yeah, the whole idea of a carbon footprint, I learned, is kind of a lie. This whole idea that I've had like planted in me for a while, that like I can do something personally about my own emissions and feel good about it, didn't come from nowhere. Turns out it came from possibly BP. In 2000, BP began a marketing campaign. They were trying to just completely overhaul their brand, and they were trying to convince individuals that it is our responsibility to mitigate and reduce our own climate impact by reducing our emissions. Around this time, they popularized the phrase carbon footprint and launched a calculator that individuals could use to plug in kind of some information about their lifestyle, sounds familiar, and get a little bit of an insight into their personal impact on the climate. If this was an effort to shift focus from companies like BP, who are responsible for tons of emissions, to the individual level, the consumer level, then it was hugely effective. In 2007, a couple years later, the Oxford UK's word of the year was carbon footprint. I think this shift worked because it made it feel solvable. It made it feel like I can do something as an individual. I can lower my impact by changing my lifestyle. And while personally I do make some lifestyle adjustments, mostly in an effort to feel like I'm living in alignment with reality, and again, I don't have my head in the sand, I acknowledge that there's only so low we can go as individuals in terms of our, for example, carbon emissions. This is really old data, but ostensibly in response to the BP marketing campaign, in 2008, MIT researchers tried to take a look at what a person's impact would be if they didn't have a car, didn't have a job, and didn't own a home, and found that we would still emit about 8 tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere per year, just by living in a society that still emphasizes fossil fuel usage. Now, I'm not a climate expert, but from what I understand, that is still an unsustainable number. I don't know whether that number has changed since 2008, but I think that that really illustrates the point that there's only so low we can go, and it's completely unrealistic to put the onus on individuals to reduce our climate impact. Regardless, though, this campaign has been really successful in planting a very sticky idea in a lot of people's heads. So even here in 2025, I'm considering paying an app called Wren to offset my personal climate impact. This is that same idea, just in a cute little package, and we've shifted from reducing your personal impact to offsetting it. This lets us as individuals alleviate some of our personal panic, feel like we're doing something, while removing some of that pressure that would otherwise be on BP and other fossil fuel companies. While some of Wren's projects focus on increased transparency and methane abatement, like preventing methane from getting into the atmosphere from landfills, the vast majority of their projects focus on carbon offsets and sequestration. But here's the thing, if carbon offsets and sequestration work at all, they take way too long, and we just don't have time. When people talk about carbon offsets and sequestration, they're usually talking about removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, often by initiatives like planting trees. In 2021, Kevin McCarthy backed the GOP proposed initiative to plant 1 trillion trees. The idea here is as these trees grow and become stronger forests, they pull a lot of atmospheric carbon dioxide into their trees and into their root systems, effectively storing that carbon for long periods of time. But planting forests with just the same tree in a very uniform pattern can cause what we call forest death. With less diversity in the ecosystem, it increases the vulnerability of these forests to pest infestations and can lower the availability of nutrients when all these plants of the same variety are competing for them. These trees are also often planted where the local communities are negatively impacted. Total Energies, for example, ran a 40,000 hectare campaign that resulted in many families in the Congo losing their land. Also, a lot of these trees aren't really looked after they're planted. I learned that like 90% of trees that were planted in a Norfolk Council project died after 5 years of having been planted. So that idea of long-term sequestration and pulling carbon from the atmosphere for long-term storage, well, they didn't even get to grow to be full trees in a full forest. Many of them died after 5 years. And as someone who lives in the Midwestern United States, I'm also very aware that these forests could be susceptible to forest fires, especially with our changing climate. Basically, every year now, I get a lot of smoke in my city from the Canadian wildfires. Sometimes it's not safe to go outside. I've also hinted a couple times now at the focus on this being a long-term project, so these trees have to store and sequester the carbon for a long time, and that it takes a little bit for the trees to grow into full forests that can actually pull the right amount of carbon from the atmosphere to actually make a difference. But even if we ignore those drawbacks, the scale of these projects just isn't going to be right and isn't going to work logistically. I personally can't really wrap my head around the number 1 trillion, but in 2019, Ethiopia set a world record that's actually been met with some skepticism by planting 350 million trees in one day. Now, to meet our 1 trillion tree goal that the GOP has proposed, we would have to plant 350 million, that world record, every day for 8 years. The world already seems on track to miss the Paris Agreement's goals for keeping warming under 2 degrees Celsius. At this rate, we're going to increase by 1.5 degrees Celsius in the next 9 years. And remember that 8-year figure was for planting trees. It takes decades for forests to sequester significant amounts of carbon, and we just don't have decades. Still, though, the popularity of apps like Wren kind of gives me hope. It makes me encouraged that we as a group are really motivated to do something. Instead of paying for apps like Wren to offset our emissions, moving some money around and encouraging others to do the same can have a much bigger impact. We have the energy. We just need to put it where it's going to be more impactful. I recently learned that the world's top 60 banks, including JP Morgan Chase, Citibank, Wells Fargo, and Bank of America, put more than $5.5 trillion into fossil fuel projects since 2015 when the Paris Agreement was put into place. And here's the thing. A lot of that money comes from us, just from everyday people who are keeping our money in these banks, letting them invest in fossil fuel projects. Pension funds, for example, are among the largest institutional investors in oil, gas, and coal, and we have huge power when, as a collective, we leverage the amount of money that we have in these banks and funds. I've been reading The Financial Activist by Jasmine Rashid, and that's like a core idea of this book from kind of early on in it. I would be waving it around, except that I'm reading it on audiobook. Before writing this book, Rashid was instrumental in moving billions of dollars away from private prisons just by getting ordinary people to close their accounts in banks that were funding these private prisons. And this resulted in an overall $2 billion loss for those banks. As another example, in 2017, when people moved their money en masse out of Wells Fargo due to finding out that they were responsible for funding a good portion of the Dakota Access Pipeline, 2 cities also did the same, including Seattle, and this resulted in an overall $4 billion loss for the bank. Everyday people are doing this, and I definitely don't know how to move a pension fund. This isn't financial advice, but I personally do have some savings that I can move from a bank that might be using my money irresponsibly to a socially responsible bank. I'll link some resources below if you're interested in exploring these other options. This shift is already happening. In the last 5 years, the impact investing sector of banking has increased to manage over $1.5 trillion globally. We're not going to solve climate change overnight, certainly not by trying to just flip a switch, like chucking money at Wren and hoping that carbon offsets fix the problem. That doesn't mean we're powerless. Instead of paying apps like Wren, look into some of these options for investing responsibly and for targeting reducing emissions instead of just offsetting them. If we can change the way that we're directing our energy and focus more on financial activism, like Jasmine Rashid's approach, I think there's hope. Thanks so much for watching. If you are interested in more nuanced takes from some curious little dude, consider subscribing. Let me know in the comments if you've used a service like Wren or if you have banking suggestions. I'm very curious to hear about your experiences. Thanks again. Talk to you later. Bye.